Okay, so Bezras Hashem, we are going to be learning Torah Kuf Samach Gimel in Likkutei Moharan Chelek Aleph. This was a fun one for me to pick out because with this book, a person can really do it with any sefer that they live with, but when you really are searching for something that needs to hit the spot, so if you open up your Likkutei Moharan, B'derech Klal, with a bittul beforehand, generally speaking, you'll find something that is speaking to you. And then there are going to be other times where it's not only speaking to you, but it fits within the framework of the Torah, it fits within the framework of the time that a person is living in. Again, like anything else, in accordance with the Shigaon and the Amuna that a person has in the Koach of the book, so the book is going to direct the person because the Neshama of the Machaber, which is Mukusha Behechlet to the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is buried within the book, and the book is a Torah's Chaim to one degree or another. So it has the capacity of responding to a person with their bittul, and when you're searching for a certain Nakuda that's shaykh lelibo be'esazo, something that speaks to your heart, wherever it is that you stand, if you open up your Likkutei Moharan with an earnestness and a bittul and a seriousness, a serious playfulness, meaning you take yourself not seriously enough to be able to believe that the book is going to direct you to where you need to look to through the koach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's mashpia lamata every second. And b'derech klal, a person will come to find that the Sefer is giving them what they need. And so this week I was able on Friday night by Kabbalah Shabbos and Parshas Chayesara to open up the Torah Kuf Samach Gimel. It's one of those Torahs that you know you've read before, but you really haven't read it until you read it for the first time, and you realize, wow, this is a mystery Torah that could have helped me out at some point in the past, but we're looking at it for the first time now. So once again, the only introduction is that when we're reading the words of Rabbeinu, and Rabbeinu is talking about Dibor, and Rabbeinu is talking about Dibor that gets caught up in the throat, right? So we're not just talking about the process and articulation of speech. That's true also. That's a fundamental thing at the heart of Rabbi Nachman's Torah, the speech act. But speech represents the direct capacity of the human being to connect, domesticate, and try and reveal light within existence. Dibor, speech, is the bridge that allows the human being to move from their isolation across the things that exist outside of them to try and connect once again to a certain sense of unity. Dibor is what enables me to create a bridge, a gesher, between my intentions and the eventual outgrowth of what my intentions are. Dibor, speech, the capacity of speech, as Rabbi Nachman describes elsewhere, what truly makes us unique is the ability to articulate speech, not just noise, but to take the noise and to allow the noise to go through the process of breaking it down through the 5 stages of concealment, the 5 processes of speech. And that's what's unique to the human being, the ability to take that general flow of noise and to break it down and to be mitzamsem so that it becomes something that is articulated. And once something is articulated, it has left my isolation and it has entered into the world at large. And once it's entered into the world at large, those diburim now have the ability of hitting the mark that they need to hit, laying on the heart of a person, entering into another person's ear, and ultimately being the vehicle through which the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is conveyed from one person to another. Dibor is the vehicle that allows meaning to unfold. Meaning is the place in which a person cultivates the sense of connectivity and attachment to something. So it's specifically through the act of speech between us and ourselves, between us and somebody else, and between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu that marks the process from our own isolation towards the goal that we want to arrive in. And Rabbi Nachman, like the Zohar Kadosh, like the Arizal, is going to spend a lot of time in the area of speech, really in the breakdown of speech, where speech has been lost and a person is trying to recuperate speech, where the original form of language has undergone a certain loss of meaning and there's a need for translation or a need for new permutations of the letters and a realignment of the words to redevelop a post-traumatic language. This is very much what the Sefer Likkutei Moharan is coming to do. It's me, Sampela Adam, who gives a mouth to the individual. Me is the secret of the tzaddik. The tzaddik gives the ability for the human being to articulate themselves. It's the secret of the dibor of the Isha Yisraeli, which is not meaningless. It's the farthest thing from meaningless. It is the most essential thing that a person can do. Dibor is meant to be a bris. It's meant to be an act of connectivity, and one word alone should be enough to convey all that needs to be conveyed. Rav Hutner and all of our tzaddikim explain that ultimately the exile of speech, ever since being kicked out of Gan Eden, is that we can speak and speak and speak and speak, yet we cannot say the exact thing that we're trying to say. We can speak around the point, We can speak around and around and around in all different types of ways, but ultimately it's in the silence that we encounter what's truly being conveyed, as opposed to the original potency of speech, where one word was spoken and it was understood what it meant. The dibur and the devarim was fundamentally connected. And so Rabbi Nachman is speaking from a place of the breakdown and the exile of speech, but also the attempt to recuperate and work through the post-traumatic kind of shattering of language and to make our way through that breaking and to redevelop a new way of communicating with ourselves, with others, and with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Zok the Heilige Rebbe. Lepa'amim munach hadibor umuchan latzeit, ve'eno yotze derech hapeh, ki im derech ha'oref. Mamish efshar l'shmoya kama pa'amim, shahadibor eno yotze b'derech hapeh, rak derech ha'oref. So Rabbi Nachman is explaining a real process, that a person can begin the process in the stages of articulation, from the speech of thought to the thought of speech, and then through the gradations of the process. But ultimately, just as the words are about to be articulated and emerge from within the mouth of the individual and be expressed into reality, instead of emerging, or instead of a gilui, or instead of an opening, the words get caught up in the throat. The language that we're trying to convey feels gargled. It feels as if there's a certain word that we're trying to say, but either because of the excitement that we feel or because of the low confidence that we feel, the D-board doesn't have the strength to push itself all the way out, and it gets caught up. It's almost like swallowed up at the last point of expression, and it gets mumbled in the back of the throat, and it sounds something like a gargle of some sort. It sounds something like an inaudible sound that was meant to come out instead of words themselves. This happens, I can only speak for myself. I know what this feeling is like. I know what this experience in the act of speech is. It's where your words get caught up and you get mumbled and you're getting ahead of yourself, and the words simply don't come out. So Rabbi Nachman is trying to understand what happens when language gets arrested in the back of the throat. What happens when the thing that I want to truly express outside of myself ultimately can't be fully expressed and it remains inside, almost like a stillborn of sorts. Kiyesh shlosha klipos. The reason that this happens, the reason that speech, which is the essential thing that we're trying to deliver outside of ourselves, the reason it doesn't always hit its destination and it gets caught up is because in truth there are three klipos that surround our capacity to articulate ourselves and that block our ability to speak. These three klipos, these three sheaths or concealment valves that cover over the capacity of the Ish HaYisraeli of using words properly to articulate the meaningfulness and the intentionality and the attention that we feel internally, it's covered over by three klipos. And these klipos and these inessential husks that prevent us from speaking properly and articulating ourselves properly, rotzim tamid litvos hadibor la'atzmam. The klipa, what the klipa wants to do is klipa is famished for expression. Klipa wants to express itself. As Rabbi Nachman writes in Torah Aleph, that the Malchus de Sitra Achra wants to be Megala Shriros Libo. It perpetually wants to express itself. It wants to make itself seen. It wants to make itself heard. It wants to feel that it's in on the action. It wants to feel that it rests at the center of the conversation, at the center of meaningfulness. It doesn't ever want to be on the periphery of meaningfulness because Klipa feels that if I'm in a place of meaninglessness, then there's no value to me. Kedusha understands that you don't have to be in the center in order to be valuable. You could be in the periphery and you could not be speaking, and lo matzati guf tov elishtika, but the klipa always is searching after that which is loud, that which is meforsam, that which is being revealed externally. And they chase after these words. They chase after any word that is emerging out of a person's mouth because they see in it something that maybe could feed their desire for some element of expression. Beprat dibor hakadosh me adam gadol. There's nothing more that the klipa wants to grab hold than a good word from a holy person, from an articulation, from something real and meaningful being expressed. This is what the klipa wants to grab hold of. It wants to ensure that true and direct dibur don't find their way out. Ki etzlam kol diburim yafim v'na'im v'chashuvim. By the klipa, any word, any act of speech, right? People talking without speaking, it's simply the noise being made, the expression, the externalization, the desire towards pirsum. That is what the klipa desires. And so in the eyes of the klipa, any person who's talking, any person is perpetually trying to reveal themselves. In the eyes of the klipa, each word is yafeh, it's na'im, and it's chashuv, because this serves as a ripe opportunity to grab hold of the potential of holiness, which is emergent through speech, and rather to transform it into a self-centered thing. The roitzim latasvam. And the klipa wants to grab hold of our dibor. The klipa wants to prevent us from being able to articulate ourselves, to the other, or to God. It wants to swallow up the notion of dibor. It wants to keep dibor as this mumbling and this kind of just meaningless chatter that goes nowhere, and an inessential speech, which is ultimately like just speaking levatala all over the place. And this is what klipa wants to do. It wants to take that possibility of meaning and make sure that it descends down into the thickness of meaninglessness and meaningless chatter. They want to grab the words. They want to grab our language. The roitzim latasvam, they want to grab all of the language for themselves. The klipa desires gilui. The klipa desires somebody who's coming to reveal themselves. The klipa desires someone who feels the need to be heard, because those words to them become the spot in which they're going to be able to insinuate themselves. Mikol sheken keshahadibor na'eh be'emes. All the more so when there's actually a beautiful dibor. All the more so when someone is speaking beautifully, all the more so when somebody is saying very powerful words, or a person is actually able to convey something to themselves, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the other person. The klipa wants to be ochez on that. How do we know? Because this is what happened when Klal Yisrael went down into Egypt. We know that Arizal tells us that the descent into Egypt was be'emes just a process of dibor going into exile. Because what's dibor? Dibor is malchus. Dibor is our capacity to express ourselves. Dibor is that secret that the inside is meant to impart its mark on the outside, and that the yid is meant to have an influence on reality. The hither side of that, the klipa of that, is that the human being will begin to feel that their expression of themselves is fundamental to reality, and that they're the ones in control of their expression. This is the vehicle of malchus. Malchus is Iskalus. Malchus is revelation. Malchus will either be the revelation of the nothingness inherent within the individual, which allows it to be a word that's free from the klipa, or a person will get stuck in the self affirmation of it all and the self-expression of it all, and that's where the klipa is going to be achuz. And so when the Shechina, when Malchus, when expressivity descends down into Egypt, it means that the expressivity of the Jewish people, the capacity of us to be the vehicles of confirming meaning and uncovering Torah Shebal Peh, the Torah of Malchus, and the redevelopment of meaning, that gets swallowed up. That's what the Mitzrim wanted to attack. It's the Meitzar Yam. It's the constriction that seems to block the ability of the individual to articulate themselves. And the entire process of Geulas Mitzrayim was the Yitzia of Dibor from Galus, as the Arizal points out. In Mitzrayim, Shayukulam Shchayrim, where everything was darkened and blackened like the blackness of night, Ilulo Haisa Sarah Yafa Tower Kolkach, even if Sarah, who went down into Mitzrayim, wasn't so beautiful, Gam came Haisa Cheshuva ben Ma'od. Like we just said, Dibor. What is Dibor? Dibor is Sarah. Sarah is the feminine principle of expressivity. Sarah was the Dibor to Avram. Sarah was the Ruach HaKodesh that was mispashet in Shechina. Sarah is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram, Kol Masha Toimer Sarah Tishma Bekola. There's something about the kol of the Shechina. There's something about someone who has the capacity of speaking clearly without any self-interest, with a pure form of Ruach HaKodesh. And so Sarah descends into Mitzrayim, and suddenly the Mitzrim see her and they say, it's beautiful. This speech of the Yid is beautiful, and they want to swallow it up. So Rabbi Nachman already said the Mitzrim would want any type of language. They would take any word, because any word becomes a vehicle that could potentially be misused for the sake of self-revelation rather than the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Mitzrim would have loved any Dibor, even if Sarah's Dibor wasn't such a beautiful Dibor, even if it wasn't the Dibor of an Isha Yisraeli and that was a Kadosh Tika Dibor. Gam ken haisa chashuva b'nei ma'od. Sarah Dibor would have been beautiful even if it was ugly, because the Klipa wants Dibor. The Hadibor hu b'chinas Sarah. Speech, articulation, expression, malchus, the emergence of something from the process on the inside to express itself externally, that marks the feminine principle of the Shechina HaKadosh, the secret of malchus peh, the externalization of something. And each and every person has this element, called echad lefi ercho. Called echad lefi ercho. Chaver, are you with me? This element of Sarah is the speech of a Yid. And the Klipa Mitzrayim wants to be ochez on that nekuda of Sarah within each and every Yid. The nekuda of Sarah is our ability to articulate ourselves, to properly traverse the very delicate territory that separates the inside and the outside. That is where speech takes place. Speech is the externalization of an interior process where the interior is emergent externally. It is the secret point at which the inside meets the outside and where yichud can express itself externally. Therefore, because it's the liminal space and it's the in-between space, it's malchus, it's the shar, it's the dimyon that we spoke about in Torah Chafei, away. It's that return back to Malchus. It's always going to be a mixed bag. It's always going to be something that is susceptible to being caught up, and also very possibly the thing that is needed in order to break through. So each and every one of us have a bechina of Sarah. Each and every one of us have it in accordance with our own level. And no matter what, the Mitzrim want to be olches on that. They want to make sure that that word, that point of intentionality, that inflection point, doesn't go where it needs to go. Yesh shehu bechinas Sarah le'umasi. There are those whose speech is like the rulership over an entire people. There are those who have a mouthpiece that they're able to speak loudly and broadly, and their voice is heard by everybody. And it's almost like the king's speech. And that person's malchus, that person's speech is going to go and affect a number of people. Shehu Moshel B'dibor Shalo al Ir Medina, that this person in the process of their articulation and their speech has an impact on the town or the country. V'yeshehu B'china Sara al Kol Olam Kulo, and then there are certain people whose dibor has an impact on the entirety of existence, on the entirety of the world. V'yeshehu Shorer B'beso, and there are those whose dibor is only shorer in their house. Each and every person has an element of their dibor. Rabbeinu says elsewhere, each and every person has their own element of malchus. Each person has their own element of malchus, and each person has to make sure not to misuse their element of malchus and not to mistake their malchus for someone else's malchus. This is the very same nakuda. Each and every person has an articulation point at which they are expressing themselves externally, in which the Sitra Achra is going to try and catch them and keep them directed on the self-interest rather than the selfless element of it, and in accordance with each and every person's impact through their speech, whether it's to the entirety of the world, or whether it's to one other person, or whether it's to nobody, each and every person is going to encounter these dynamics of the process of sorrow, which is our dibur, our desire to articulate the emergence of thought into speech, and the process of fighting to ensure that speech hits its desired place. Ach, etzlam, when it comes to the Mitzrim, when it comes to exile, when it comes to the externality of the world that thrives off of revelation, hiddenness is not something that the world thrives off of. The externality of the world thrives primarily off of the hiskalus, of the shiras libo, and the endless need to chatter and to articulate, which is emergence from the fear of not being heard rather than a point of strength. And the klipa wants to be oches on those words because those words are just pure potential for self-interest. And so every word that is emergent from an Isha Yisraeli, when I'm trying to lay my mark on reality, the Sitra Achra is waiting there, trying to ensure that it doesn't hit its destiny and that it gets caught up. Ach etzlam, by Mitzrayim, in the aspect of Mitzrayim, shekulam shcharim v'shvelim, kol hadiburim chashuvim v'roitzim l'tafsam. From a perspective of Mitzrayim, every dibor that comes from an Isha Yisraeli, every dibor alone is going to be so desirous to them because they're so mushbal and they're so stuck in the externality and the blackness of things that they're going to try and run after any type of word. What are these three klipos that we described? So this is working on the Arizal, that the place of Paro, where's the place of Paro? The place of Paro is the Oref. Osios of Paro is the Oref, it's the neck. It's the extension, the front and the back of the neck that allow for the proper transition from the thoughts of the mind to the articulation of speech down towards the emotional experience and the physical experience of being a human being in this world. The Meitzar Yam, that very thin, delicate place that allows the light to transition from above to below, is the secret of the Oref, the secret of the neck itself. Paro is the klipa of the Oref because Paro is the osios of Oref, and Klal Yisrael found themselves stuck there in the secret of Am Kishe Oref Heim. And in that place of the Oiref, we're going to find the three Sari Paro. If Paro represents the constriction of the throat, in which Dibor seems to undergo a real privation and a closing in on, so there are three klipos that are associated with Paro, the Shloshe Sari Paro, which express themselves in the throat, in the process of the individual articulating themselves. These three klipos that a person is going to encounter, these three prevention points that a person is going to encounter when they try and express themselves are the Sar HaOfim, the Sar HaMashkim, and the Sar HaTvachim. The baker, the butler, and the butcher of Paro, which represent the taivos of achila and shtia, right? So the thing that keeps a person stuck, again, we're trying to abstract the metaphor, so to speak, of the Arizal that Rabbeinu is using to try and understand what it means for the individual in their day-to-day, moment-to-moment process. I want to express a nakuda of das. I want to express a nakuda that finds expression through the Shechina Hakadosha, through my mouth, and I want to express it externally. Meaning to say, Pasach picha v'ya'iru dvarecha. I want my language to descend down from the innermost point of my mind through the secret of articulation and the chituch hadiburim and the secret of the tzimtzum and the hegvuros of the mouth. And I want my words to go exactly where they need to go and hit their mark and do what they need to do. What blocks that process is the constriction that takes place when the words begin to sound downwards and they undergo this process of diminution and they're moving through the tunnels of expressivity. It's specifically there that the klipa is waiting to pounce and enclose those diburim and to make the person feel that their dibur is no good. Even feeling that my dibur is no good is an arrogant perspective, because if I know that it's the Shechina that's medaberes mitoich groini, then I don't have to have diburim yafim. I don't have to have beautiful, articulate words in order for those words to be meaningful. If I'm caught up with the self-interest and the self-expression of it all, then anytime I feel I said the wrong word or I misspoke, so I'm going to say that, oh, it's meaningless. That's also part of the klipa. The klipa is trying to make us feel that our diburim are meaningless. And the klipa that's blocking us there, all the taivos, achila, shtia, all of the desire to feed the self rather than to feed that which is other than the self. Paro is the osios of the oref. Paro is the back of the neck, that klipa that conceals das, that klipa that conceals and blocks the possibility of moving from above to below. She'omed achoreha kedusha, that stands in the back of kedusha, blocking it. It stands waiting there to block the procession from the light from descending downwards to a place of revelation. V'tekef kesheroa hashlosha sarim hanal. Immediately, when these three parts of ourselves, the Sari Paro, the part of us that wants to eat, the part of us that wants to drink, and the part of us that wants to be stuck in self-interest, that seeks out the Dibor. They seek out Sarah. They look towards Sarah, which is the Dibor. And if that Dibor is beautiful, and again, like we said, any Dibor is beautiful to them, as Yafev and the Klipa wants to grab hold of this, the Toifsin also Paro, and they grab the Dibor, they turn it into a place of self-expression and self-interest, and they bring it to Paro, Kamosha Kasiv, the Yaru also Sari Paro, that the servants and the masters of Paro, the servants and the soldiers of Paro saw her, v'yahaluha oisel Paro, and they brought the speech of the Yid back to Paro to get caught up in that concealed place. Ki ashleisha sarim hanizkar la'el him hakana veset vevridim v'toisven hadibur laha'iref. These are the three expressions: the windpipe, the feeding tube, as well as the forms of connection that exist between the neck and every other part of the body. Those are going to be the things that are covered over by the elements of concealment. Again, Rabbeinu is speaking about the three things that need to take place in order for me to be able to express my language properly. In order for Malchus to be expressed properly, it has to be built upon the three-pronged rule that allows for the fourth principle to take shape, which is Chesed, Gvura, and Teferes. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and David. Malchus, Dibor, is always the fourth to the three steps that precede it. Those three steps, the Kena, the Vesed, and the Vridim, which can be covered over by the Sar HaOifim, the Sar HaTvachim, and the Sar HaMashkim, are the three stages necessary in order to reveal my speech. And therefore, when it gets concealed, this is the place that it's going to get caught up. V'hinei, k'shahadibor hu dibor kadosh. When a person is actually speaking holy words, when a person is actually trying to learn Torah, speak tefillah, be in hisbodedus, in the aspect of Sarah, where my language is actually the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shaya Shechina Ima, right? That the Shechina was with Sarah. Sarah represents the Shechina. If all of us have Shechina, each and every one of us is also in an element of Shechina Medaberes Misoch Krono. Av shahayat tsar la'Avraham ma'oid ma'oid me'es shenilkacha. Even though when Avram Avinu sees this process taking shape, and he sees the Sari Paro look at Sarah, he sees the klipos of the throat, see the dibor that was emergent out to create meaning in this world, and he sees that Sarah is being captured, even though it was very, very difficult for Avram. Im kol zeh yada ubatach b'Hashem. He knew and he trusted in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These two steps, he knew and he trusted in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How can you know and then trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu if knowing is seemingly a level higher than trust? So why is Rabbeinu saying that he knew that it was okay and he trusted it was okay? Elama, the knowledge is the willingness to live within a space of faith. choosing to know that I operate in the world of faith. Once I know with certainty that I operate in the world of faith, because even though I can't be certain about anything there, I can be certain that I've chosen faith. And in that world, I have the possibility of having bitachon. So there's an element of yediyah, of knowledge, which is an absolute buy-in to the system of Kedusha, which enables me to enter in and see every aspect of my life through the lens of Kedusha. So there was a yediyah and then there was a bitachon, because it's only with buying into the system that a person can then have the bitachon. Avram Avinu knew, and he was boteach, shehu tova gedola shenit v'solasham. After Avram Avinu found that his dibor got stuck, that Sarah got caught up, that the Sari Paro seemed to conceal and congeal over the dibor hakadosh, which was the expression of Hakadosh Baruch Hu in the world, the tzaddik understands that even though I don't want it to get stuck, nevertheless, if it gets stuck, there's a good reason that it's getting stuck there. Why? It's going to make a big nachas for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the nachas for HaKadosh Baruch Hu that comes out when the dibur, when our speech, when our expression gets caught up in concealment? Well, it's the aspect of Eis Asher Shalat HaAdam Ba'Adam Leralo, Sheniklata Shelakta Misham Nitzotzos Kadoshos Kiyadua. So the Rabbi Nachman is bringing us into a new concept, that we never want there to be concealment. We never want there to be shvira. We never want malchus to break. But what do we do once Malchus breaks? And once Malchus finds itself caught up within concealment? And once the desire towards the articulation of the spirit falls into the articulation of the ego, what happens there? Instead of bemoaning the fact and saying, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to retrieve this thing, we have to shift into the new level of tzaddik consciousness, which is that if it happened, avad had to happen that way. And the reason that it happens is that when something positive, when a nitzutz hakadosh gets stuck within concealment, what it's actually going to do is it's going to create a battle. It's going to create a resistance within the realm of concealment, where there's a spark of holiness there. And all it's going to do is going to force the impurity to reveal more and more Kedusha afterwards. It might feel that it's catching something holy, but the holiness goes down there in order to find all of the other holy sparks that are found down in that sunken place. And by descending down there, it has the ability of freeing all of the fallen sparks. What this means on a practical level, as I understand it in the context of what we're talking about, is that when a person loses hope, when a person loses sight of the strength of their dibor because they feel that their dibor is falling into meaninglessness, they feel that their dibor is being caught up in the inaudible nature of not being heard, of talking without speaking, or hearing without listening, right? So in that place, by grappling with the problem, by framing our situation properly, by finding the strength that we need to descend down into the issue, we actually enable ourselves to draw out more lights of Kedusha that come out through the battle with concealment than we would have been able to reveal had we never encountered concealment on its own. That the concealment, the descent into exile enables a re-intensification, a reinforcement of the dibor. So yes, the Sari Paro might think that they've captured Sarah for a moment, but ultimately, as we see in the Sipur and Tanakh itself, that's only there in order to bring out more gifts and more goodness, because Paro is going to come to realize that this does not belong to me in the end of the day. That the word of a Yid does not belong to the Klippa. And no matter what, even within the self-expression of a Yid is hidden the ultimate truth of Ana Emloch, which is the fact that each and every person has a Chelek Eloi Kamimal, and each and every one of us want to just express ourselves for the sake of the Shechina, even if our intentions are not that way. That's the Sof Davar HaKol Nishma Esat Lokim Yireh Kizeh Kol Adam. And so the Klippa is going to lose out. It's eight shashalat Adam ba'adam laralo. The Adam is the Adam de Klipa. It's the realm of concealment. It's the realm of stuckness that seems to take over and lay upon and cover over the realm of goodness. But ultimately, what it's going to be revealed to be is negative for the negative side. That the negative side seems to strengthen itself, but in truth, it's the beginning of its downfall. Shelakta misham nitzotzos hakadoshos. That Avram Avinu had the ability of uncovering more and more meaningless words that caught up in that place of Paro, and to elevate them out. Like Rabbeinu talks about in Torah Ches, in Likkutei Moharan Tinyana, about the ability to daven with strength and to allow one's words to be so sharp that they're shot like an arrow that goes into the belly of the snake itself. And by going into the belly of the snake, those words have the ability to cause the snake to throw up. Kaviyachol, when the snake throws up, it throws up all of the tfilos and all of the nitzotzos that were stuck in the place of the nachash. And it's a hisgalus Rabbah. It's a gilui that could not have been revealed without that descent downwards. This is what Avram Avinu knew. Avram Avinu knew that by losing sight of the dibur and beginning to process and struggle with that processing of dibur, so then a person is going to uncover more. Aval imhu davar pashut. But let's say it's not a dibur of Torah or tefillah, and I'm not operating in a place like speaking like Avram Avinu, and my dibur is not like Sarah. Chas v'shalom. Efshar sheyitfesu oto l'sham. God forbid, it's possible that a person's dibur can get lost there. Ukemat chas v'shalom yishtakeh sham. And kemat, again, not absolutely, but kemat, it could appear that our dibur gets stuck into self-interest and it gets entrenched in that place, and then it can't be expressed afterwards. Imlo sheyavot tzadik emes, without the tzadik emes descending down, who is the person sheyesh lo koach lahotzi l'sham. This is why Moshe Rabbeinu had to descend down into Mitzrayim to redeem all of the exile of speech. That for Avram Avinu, the speech could always be redeemed because any feeling that speech has been caught up in some secondary framework of expression, Avram Avinu has the ability of seeing the process that will lead to more growth there. By grappling with the sense of self-expression, the tzaddik comes to a place of knowing that everything is just the expression of the Shekhinah. But let's say we find ourselves caught up and feel if we can't speak clearly, if we're not being heard properly, if there's not enough people listening, etc., all of the things that send our dibur into galus. So if we don't have those moichin of Avram that have the ability of seeing the nitzutz hakadosh being oile from within the shtika and the concealment itself, then we might, God forbid, begin to feel like the language, like our words, are mamish getting caught up there. And there's nothing more frustrating, nothing more damaging to the individual who feels that they have something they need to articulate, something that they need to share, something they feel they need to communicate to the other or the world outside of them. And when it gets caught up and when it gets blocked up and when it descends into a place of emptiness, it feels lonely, it feels isolative, it feels impossible to break free. And so this descent into exile of the word, where a person feels like ne'elamti dibur, I can't open my mouth, I can't speak. Even when I try and speak, I'm being misunderstood, I'm not being heard properly. That's the exile of speech that happens unless there's a tzaddik there to bring out all of those nitzotzos. V'yesh adam, and this is I don't know the exact transition point here, to be honest. It's not, meaning we have to understand the exact mechanics of how this next step takes place. Rabbi Nachman says that we have to look at Torah Samach Beis, which discusses these ideas at more length, but we're not going to go to Samach Beis right now. So let's look at this shift. Okay, so we just went to talking about each and every person's way of speaking and the feeling that their speaking is getting caught up in places of concealment. But there's another type of concealment, the concealment of the mind. What happens in the concealment of the mind? Where a person, it's not that a person feels that they're not being heard, but a person feels or assumes that everybody else is talking about them. Everybody else is thinking about them. Now, I don't mean it on the grandiose level that I feel that everybody is actually talking about me, but when a person feels self-conscious and a person feels caught up within the dynamics of the ego that is not being received properly or not being heard properly or not being expressed properly, what a person does is they walk around assuming that because I conceive of myself as the center of the universe, everybody else must also see me as the center of the universe. And if everybody else sees me as the center of the universe, then I'm obviously what people are talking about. And if I'm what people are talking about, then it's not that my dibur is stuck, but I'm caught up in the dibur of everybody else. I find myself exiled in the imaginings that every other mouth in the world is talking about me. It's a different type of exile. It's an exile where a person feels that I am so hypersensitive to my sense of ego. I'm so hypersensitive to my need for acknowledgement or affirmation that it must be that everybody is talking about me. You see this in the realms of addiction, for example. In the realms of addiction, the joke is that really there was a guy at a baseball game, Lahavdil. The guy was at a baseball game and he hears from 4 rows behind him, someone was calling down, Mark, Mark. And he turns around and he doesn't see anyone calling. And again, he hears Mark, Mark, and he turns around and no one's there. Again, Mark, Mark, no one's there. He turns back afterwards and he says, please stop, that's not my name. Meaning the fact that he heard somebody else calling somebody else's name was impossible. It was him speaking to him, but just getting his name wrong. Because when it comes to self-centeredness, when it comes to self-obsession, when it comes to the ego that gets caught up in its terror of disappearing that it needs so desperately to reaffirm its capacity of expression no matter what. So instead of being able to speak, I'm just going to assume that I'm being spoken about. and I'm projecting myself over and over and over into the mouths and the minds of other people, and I'm creating all sorts of resentments and discrepancies. And this is a secondary form of exile. So this is what Rabbi Nachman says as follows. V'yesh Adam, there's a person, and it's all of us. Shena'aso mikulo umimenu dibor. That his entirety becomes a speech act for everybody else. My personality becomes something that other people are talking about. Shena'asa mikulo umimenu dibor. My self becomes speech for somebody else. Someone else is talking about me, thinking about me. Shena'asa sicha b'fi habrios. That this person is being spoken about in the mouth of other people. And it can't mean somebody who's actually Mefursam. This means our projections. It means that I'm assuming that everybody is talking about me. I'm assuming that everybody is thinking about me. V'hakol dober mimenu. And everyone's speaking about this person. And this person feels that they are being transferred from one mouth to the other and being scattered amongst the mouths of all people. And whichever mouth the person feels their personality is falling into, they're going to experience different pains and different forms of suffering. In accordance to each and every situation, each and every person has a bechina of paro. There's the klipa of paro. There's the klipa of speech going the wrong way. Each and every person has that place within themselves. Adam gadol. And when I think a good person or a big person is speaking about me, so their paro is going to be a melech Mitzrayim and a Medina. And their shlosh sarim and their three klipos that seem to conceal are going to be much stronger. Ashkashem toifsim hadibor v'nofel aleihem tsar lo ma'od. Im kol zeh yesh lo nicha she'efshar lo limsoa sham nitzotzos kadoshos yeh tova mizeh. So Rabbi Nachman is again making the distinction between what it means to be caught up in the mind of someone big who I think is talking about me, or to be caught up in the mouth of someone small who I think is talking about me, the same way that the klipa wants to grab hold of any dibor, but all the more so a holy dibor. Nevertheless, when we find ourselves in those places, projection, and finding myself caught up in the minds of other people, it's my responsibility to make sure that I can find nitzotzos hakadoshos there, that there should be something good that comes about from it. Ach keshabal lefi anashim shvelim. What happens when the projections of self seem to get sedimented around a certain low perception? I'm being spoken about in a low way by lowly people. And at that place, in the low place, when it's a low sense of self, when the dibur gets caught up in the throat, and I fall there, v'sham midbar shmama, and in that place, it's like a desolate desert, tsaya v'areva, dying for thirst and yearning for comfort, lo aver ba'ish, where there's no settlement there whatsoever. I'm just caught up in a lack of self because I feel that I'm being spoken about in such a low way, or I'm seeing myself or assuming I'm being spoken about in such a low way. Ein lo imi lifgoa. I have no one who I can speak to in this place. There's nowhere to break free from in that place. Tsar umar ma'od. It's a difficult and bitter place. Hanefesh holechas na'a v'nada umitpazeres bepizor hanefesh befi kama anashim. The soul descends and it travels here and there and here, scattered in a form of scattering in the language of many, many other people, in the mouths of many, many other people. And the person begins to feel exhausted and tired and hungry and yearning like they're in the desert. And the person doesn't have any sustenance to draw down into themselves. When a person finds themselves in that desolate place where they have nothing left, they can't speak, they can't think, they feel that they're caught up completely in that sunken place, they begin to try and draw sustenance through themselves. They start to eat themselves up alive. But bechinas, in the secret of ish basar zroa yochelu, as the pasuk says by the tochacha, that a person is going to come, and not by the tochacha, as the pasuk says that a person is going to come and eat their own arm. What that means is a person, when they feel that there's no sustenance that can be drawn from other people in the world, because they're simply talking about low things and they're keeping all of the insight for themselves and they're surrounding my mind and all the projections are here, there, everywhere. At that point, a person transforms and starts trying to find sustenance from inside. I can no longer draw sustenance from the outside of other people, and I start trying to draw sustenance from the inside. And listen to the words of Rabbi Nachman. This paragraph is why I felt this Torah was important to teach. V'hadimyon ukedimyon ha'ish. For example, like the person, shegavar alav hakriros ma'od, where a person feels very cold. Ve'ein lo shum kisoy l'chamim atzmo ulhisatef bo. And they have no covering with which to warm themselves, with which to cover themselves. And what the person does at that point is they double themselves over. They double over upon themselves. They double over upon themselves, and they almost hug themselves, and they squeeze inwards, they minimize themselves, they scrunch themselves up, closer to themselves, moving the self closer to the self. Kamoken hanefesh. So too with the soul when it retracts into itself in the hopes of finding comfort. It has nothing to cover it over. It has nothing to protect it. And this is the aspect of nafshem bahem tesatef, that a person is going to have to engarb themselves and protect themselves within their soul itself. That the person is just now trying to create defenses from within themselves. There's nowhere else to turn. The isolation grows to a certain point where there's a splitting of the self that enables the self to become doubled, and in that doubling of the self can now cover over itself. Mineyubei. It's the secret of a splitting and a doubling that takes shape without any introduction of a foreign element other than the self itself. The kol kachnit alpha, and the soul gets so tired and overwhelmed. Even if you feed it something, it can't receive that sustenance. Like a sick person who has spent so much time in their sickness, to the degree that they've become so weakened, that they can't receive even the slightest amount of food. And if you were to give them that amount of food, they push it away and they're not able to partake in it. What are we supposed to do? We've caused this to ourselves. As I understand this, Rabbeinu is saying that in one of two ways we've caused this place to ourselves where we have no sustenance anymore, either because it's the self-expression of speech or the projections of our minds and the focusing on everybody else rather than just on myself. We find ourselves completely excluded from our own narrative. And what are we to do, says Rabbi Nachman? We cause this to ourselves. We've not listened to the Eitzos Tovas that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, because a person gets stuck in the oirif, in the backside of things, where the dibor can come out, as opposed to the panim, which is a direct expression of speech. We get caught up in all of the dimyon and the self-expression and the projection, rather than focusing on the one thing and the one thing alone, which is dibor panim el panim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ki'ish medaber el reyehu. V'azu chavush b'beis ha'asurin. And at this point, what it's like is the person is enclosed within the jail. They're stuck. There's no way to break free from the enclosure upon the self. Because the person is caught and stuck there. And don't think that just because a person gets to experience an aliyah from time to time, it means that we're not caught up in that either desire for self-expression or the obsession towards being expressed in somebody else's mind. Because even if a person ascends upwards, Kadosh Baruch Hu allows the person to fall right back down again. So it's not a real aliyah. A person hasn't gone out in the right way. Ki aliyah lo haisa keseder. It's not keseder. When a person is able to jump out in a miracle moment and experience a dibor tova, that doesn't mean that a person has broken through from the obsession of self and the assumption that I'm being spoken about by other people over and over again. Al kein nishlach lamata, kamosha kosev, as it's written, Yalu shamayim yardu tohomos. A person can ascend upwards, but nevertheless they might find themselves thrown down. Hashem yishbarach yishlach refuas hanefesh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send us a refuas hanefesh, ki batachnu shehiyeh hakol nachon. Because we have a trust that everything is going to be the right way. V'yitev achrisenu, amen. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to create a positive end for us. This is, I don't understand what's happening in this Torah, but the way that I'm reading it, and it could very well be mistaken, but that Rabbeinu is setting up the two issues that block the soul from finding expression. Number one is the gullus of Dibor, which is when the gullus is caught up with self-expression, and it becomes an attempt to be Megala, my own heart, rather than the heart above, which is the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It becomes a kavod malachim. And that Dibor gets stuck. And even then, there's still the possibility of seeing how that dibor could come out from that place. And through the grappling with my sense of ego, I could uncover more positive light. And then there's other times where I might feel that my dibor has gotten completely stuck, or there are going to be times where I feel that I am projecting myself into the mouth of others. And for a tzaddik like Rabbi Nachman, it was true. Everybody was talking about him. And each and every one of us have an akut of tzaddik within us that we assume is being spoken about by everybody else, taking us out of our own self, feeling that we're the center of the universe. And these are places that we get stuck in, and we have no way of protecting ourselves. We have no way of warming ourselves with words. The words don't warm us anymore. The sense of connection doesn't warm us anymore. And we find ourselves caught, stuck, folded over upon the self. Nothing else external to cover over ourselves, but rather the need to split our own selves to try and find protection. And again, even if there are moments of relief in these places, nevertheless, that doesn't mean that a person has broken through. It just means that a person is going to fall back down afterwards. And what we need, Rabbeinu says, is refuah hanefesh. A person needs a refuah of the nefesh because we trust that everything is going to be okay. And then in the end of the day, everything is going to be okay. Refuah hanefesh over here, if we look at Torah, Ayin Beis, Ayin Dalid, Romim al Shemayim Elokim al Kol Haaretz Kvodo, talking about Dibor B'deya, Dibor without Deya. Listen to what he says. Hine kol adam sarich l'rafos nefesh. Each person has to heal their soul. Tahainu laha'alois l'makom sharasha, to bring their soul back up to its place. Ubama, and with what? By way of elevating the dinim that cover over Dibor. Meaning the refuah sanefesh comes with refining my process of sharing myself with others or sharing myself with the world. And the only thing we could do in these situations is try, right? It's that Hashem Yisbarach Yishlach Refuas HaNefesh Ki Batachnu Shiyeh HaKol Nachon V'yitev Achrisenu. So Zakta Helig Rabbi Natsan over here at the end of the Torah. Kol Zeh Shamati Mipiv HaKadosh. Again, it's not by chance. He's describing, I heard this come from the mouth of Rabbeinu, meaning Rabbeinu spoke and I heard these words. They didn't get caught up in Gullus. They didn't get caught up in the other way. I spoke and I heard these words. Aval Achar Kach, but afterwards, Dvarim Eile Etzli B'Ksav, when Rabbi Nachman saw these words written down by me afterwards, Amar Shahad Dvarim Eile Loi Ksavim Yafe Karaui. He said that these words were not written properly, which is incredible because what we're seeing is the exact iteration of this teaching taking place in Rabbi Nachman's life. Rabbi Nachman is saying something, and Rabbi Nachman feels that he's grasping it. And then when Rabbi Nachman looks back at what Rabbi Nachman is saying, he says, no, you didn't grasp it properly. That even by Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Nassan, there's this issue of the dibor not being niklat properly, of the dibor going in the wrong direction. And Rabbeinu said that in truth, this is all connected to Maseches Brachos Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis. Arba tzrichim lahoidos, the shoresh of the bracha of Birchas HaGomel, of the need for an individual who is in a death-bringing experience, a moment of descent, a moment of falling that brought them into a situation that was life-threatening, and there was no way out except the miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved them. And the response that we have to have is Birchas HaGomel. Shehem Mivuarim B'Mizmar Kuf Zayin, which is the hodu that the Baal Shem Tov initiated that we say by Erev Shabbos. And for the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, the point was that the transition between Erev Shabbos into Shabbos, a person had to feel that they were literally being saved in every possible way of being saved, because the week itself would have killed them in numerous ways. Each process of the week is losing the self, losing Dibor, Sarah going into exile. And if it were not for the Chesed and the Rabbim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who saves us at every moment, we wouldn't be saved. That's why we say Hodu on Erev Shabbos. And it appears from his words over there, Shakol ha'arba haniska la'el, all four people who have to bench Gomel, Shem holche midbaros, v'chavushim bebeis ha'asurim, v'choyle v'yordei hayam, all of these different existential quandaries that a person finds themselves in, the descent into the midbar, the wandering in the midbar, pizor achar pizor, as Rabbi Nachman said, the descent into the sea, being stuck in jail, sickness, hakol merames al tsaras hanefesh. All of them hint in truth to the existential pains that the neshama and the nefesh experience. Kimavur la'el b'inyan tsaras hanefesh. As explained above, when it comes to the pain of the soul, when it doesn't have access to dibur or to thinking clearly. Shaheleches na'avinada, it's wandering to and fro. Ayef v'yageyav, it's sama b'midbar, tired, exhausted, hungry, and thirsty in the desert. And this is the aspect of Ta'u Bamidbar, that they were wandering in the wrong way in the desert. V'chein medaber me'inyan chayli nefesh. And it also speaks over there about the sickness of the soul. Shakol kach nit alpha, that the soul has gotten so weak. Ad asher afilu im noistim lo davar ma'achal, even if it's being fed what it needs to be fed, it's not going to receive what it needs to receive. This is the element of kol oichel tesaiv nafsham, that any food the soul despises. Shemedaber mechoyle, v'chein medaber me'inyan chavish mebesa asurim. The capital speaks about someone stuck in jail, and the tsaras hanefesh of yalu shamayim yardu tohoimus, that this person ascends upwards, but they might descend down into an even deeper death. Shazo b'chinas yardei hayam, the descent into the sea. Umavur kavnas Akadosha, and Rabbeinu explained the intention. Shemaram is kol arba tzrichim lahoidos. All of these four who need to thank Hakadosh Baruch Hu, it's pointing to the inyan of tsaros hanefesh ba'avodas Hashem, the existential pain that exists within the self when it struggles with avodas Hashem. Sheish aleha machloikas rabim, that there are all sorts of things that block a person. The rabim kamim aleha, and there's so many attacks from each side. V'soveles iyunim v'yisurim v'tiltulim gedolim v'tzaras meshunos, and it experiences all sorts of difficulties and transitions and tremendous struggles. And each and every time HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables us to find that Dibor Kadosh, to scream out to him from the bottom, to scream out, Aye. And it's for this that we have to perpetually be grateful and praising to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who gives us the ability to uncover the capacity to scream that one word wherever we find ourselves, to break free from all of the concealment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us understand the intentionality of what Rabbi Nachman was saying. This is a much harder Torah in the sense that it demands that interpretation, to see the speech act and the being spoken about as psychological frames. But I think that what Rabbi Nassim does at the end of this Torah is really highlight that ultimately we are talking about tsaras hanefesh. But again, I just want to highlight what Rabbeinu speaks about when a person feels that the layers of comfort are stripped away to the degree that there is no warmth available other than the warmth that will come about from the self and friction with the self. And the self and friction with the self of trying to cover itself minei ubei. That is part of the process that we said when we find the Dibor and Golus by Paro, Avram Avinu understands that there's a secret that's going to come out of here. And when a person finds themselves in that place where Avi ve'imi azavuni, my moichin have left me, I have nobody to turn to, I can't even turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavyachol, in that moment, that becomes a place where a person cultivates and deepens their connection, where we reveal the more within the less. Even though it seems like it's a post-traumatic reaction, when I have nothing left, I start trying to feed on myself and protect myself with myself and cultivate that co-relationship with myself. Even though it appears to be a descent into exile, it's specifically from here that we're going to be megala, the miyata machsikas amaruba, the capacity of the self to become more than it is at that very moment. And it's specifically in moments of breakdown that power to break on through to the other side is revealed. How, why, we don't know. A very good mushal, a good mushal. This is a mushal that I usually use for it. It's that I remember with like blackberries. I used to use this to describe rock bottom experience for clients in rehab, that when you had like a BlackBerry phone, so if it hit underneath like 3% on the phone, so you weren't able to make a phone call. But if you were to dial 911, there was some backup storage that the phone would kick back into gear and have the capacity of making a phone call. And then if you would hang up the emergency phone call, you would now have power left to make another phone call. So you can't speak. There's no ability to connect. And then there's the moment of the emergency where a person feels that I need to reach out because my life depends on it. And it's that feeling that awakens the capacity of the soul to speak more. In the moment of the bottom, in the moment of the powerlessness, in the moment of the recognition that I can't do anything on my own, at that point, the bottom drops out and more opens up within the person. The secret of the Miyat HaMachzikas Abaruba, which is the secret of being a tzaddik and the ability to uncover the light that emerges specifically from within the descent, which is the secret of HaGoimel L'Chayevim Tovos. The Goimel is the secret of the Gamal that we spoke about in another shir last week, because it's the secret of I'm going to go down with you into Mitzrayim and I'm also going to come out with you. Ani gam yared v'gam aleh, and somebody who sees a gamal in their dream, the Gemara tells us on Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, not Nun Daled Amud Beis, Nun Hey Amud Beis. It says that a person should see that Misa was nichnas on a person, that there was a knas of Misa, and they were saved from it, which is why Yitzchak Avinu saw camels when he came out. Because the camel, the goimel, is the secret of uncovering that light that is present within the deepest, darkest places where we feel that we've lost ourselves, and the ability to maintain the secret of Sarah, to maintain a direct word to ourselves, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a mantra that can break us out from any place imaginable, and to have a refuah sanefesh be'ezras Hashem.